Hello everyone and welcome to IFST Spring Conference 2021, Food Science and Technology, Thinking Smart, Acting Smart. This session is called Smart Regulatory. My name is Sam Jennings. I'm Director of Berry Ottaway and Associates, a food science, technical and regulatory consultancy, and Chair of the IFST Food Regulatory Group. I will be chairing this session. I would like to thank the Food and Drink Federation for kindly sponsoring the conference and GFSI for being a conference supporter. We would also like to thank our corporate supporters, Marks & Spencer, Camden BRI, Nutraceuticals Group and IFIS, who provide sponsorship throughout the year, which helps IFST to deliver many of its charitable activities. Please share your experience of our conference on social media using the hashtag IFSTSC21. Feel free to make comments and ask questions throughout the session using the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. You may need to hover over your screen if using a mouse or touch your screen. You can also upvote other attendees' questions by clicking the like button next to their question. There are scheduled Q&A sessions after the presentations where we will ask our speakers as many of these questions as possible. The presentations are being recorded and will be uploaded to the event platform within a couple of days. The Q&A sessions will not be made available as part of these recordings and are only available live. Our first speaker is Dr. Jackie McElhenney. Jackie is Head of Science at Food Standards Scotland and manages Food Standards Scotland's Science and Evidence Strategy. She works alongside Food Standards Scotland's Chief Scientific Advisor to provide assurance over the organisation's research and risk analysis responsibilities. And she's presenting today on regulating the food chain in Scotland, a partnership approach. For more information on Jackie's biography, please check out her profile on our event platform. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Jackie.
Thanks very much, Sam, and many thanks to IFST for inviting me here today to give you an overview of our approach to regulating the food chain in Scotland. In particular, the work we do with our local authority community to ensure a consistent and collaborative approach to food law enforcement. Next slide, please. But first of all, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what food law delivery landscape looks like in Scotland, starting with ourselves. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Food Standards Scotland was set up in 2015 under the Food Scotland Act as a non-ministerial office as part of the Scottish administration, but working independently from the Scottish Government. Now, we were previously part of the Food Standards Agency, but following machinery of government changes in Westminster in 2010, when responsibilities for nutrition and labelling were moved from the FSA to the Department of Health and DEFRA, Scottish ministers made the decision to retain these areas, along with food safety, under a single Scottish food body. But although we're now a separate organisation to the FSA, we're aligned with them in most other ways with a similar set of statutory objectives and values, and we continue to work very closely with them across all areas of our common interest across the UK. Next slide, please. Now, this slide just serves to illustrate where we sit in the regulatory and policy landscape in the UK, where responsibilities are spread across different parts of government. And in Scotland, we have really seen the value of having a single food body covering all of these areas, which along with our size, has really enabled us to foster the partnership approach to food law enforcement that I'm going to talk about today. Next slide, please. But first of all, I think it's useful to understand the landscape that we're working in Scotland. Food is extremely important to the Scottish economy, and it's also a highly politicised issue. We're working against a backdrop of Scotland as a land of food and drink, where there are very ambitious targets to grow the industry, both in terms of ensuring our own population is able to access healthy and nutritious food, and that the sector can continue to develop its export markets. And this, of course, is something that's come into much sharper focus post-EU exit. Next slide, please. And it's also important that our approach to regulation takes account of the profile of our industry, which is dominated by small and medium enterprises. And many of these are producing high-risk perishable products. and the emphasis on provenance and quality and lack of technical support can often present challenges in terms of compliance. Next slide, please. And of course, as regulators, we're now facing even greater challenges as a result of EU exit. And for Food Standards Scotland, this has meant taking on a number of new responsibilities and bolstering our working relationships with the Food Standards Agency across UK and Scottish Government and internationally to provide assurance over our food chain. And also ensuring that we have the resources and capability in place for delivering official controls and supporting our exporting businesses in this vastly changing food environment. Next slide, please. And of course, if this wasn't enough, we were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant impact, not only in relation to public health, but also how our food chain operates and health inequalities. And all of this has placed a massive burden on our enforcement community and their ability to deliver official controls effectively. We're going to be dealing with the consequences of this for some time, which makes it even more important to work collaboratively to ensure our regulatory system is able to adapt to the significant changes we're seeing in our food system. Next slide, please. So this brings me on to Food Standards Scotland's new strategy for 2021 to 26, which we're due to launch later this month. Now, a new strategy outlines our priorities for the next 5 years, working in a very different food environment with very different regulatory challenges than when FSS was set up. Our strategy is based around 5 strategic outcomes shown in the right hand of this slide here. And one of these is titled Responsible Food Businesses Are Enabled to Thrive. And this forms the basis of our regulatory approach, which I'm going to tell you a bit about in this presentation. Next slide, please. Now, we're aiming to deliver our strategy through 6 goals, and the first 2 of these goals are really focused on maintaining assurance over food safety and standards post-EU exit and promoting effective and ethical regulation across the industry. And of course, we can't do this alone. Collaboration is absolutely key to delivering these goals, and our most important delivery partners are our local authorities and the food industry. Next slide, please. But in Scotland, we're actually very well set up for this already. And this slide aims to illustrate how we deliver official controls, with Food Standards Scotland responsible for the delivery of official controls in our 98 approved abattoirs and cutting plants, also the shellfish sector. And from April this year, we've also taken over delivery of animal feed controls. And of course, we have our 32 local authorities who have responsibility for between 700 and 800 approved establishments, in addition to over 60,000 other food businesses right across Scotland, and whose enforcement activities we oversee through our audit programmes at Food Standards Scotland. But as I said, collaboration is really a key focus of our work in Scotland. It always has been. And local authorities are, as I said, are our key partners, and the platform for partnership working in Scotland is our Scottish Food Enforcement Liaison Committee, or SFELC. And through SFELC, we're able to drive ongoing improvements to the delivery of food law enforcement. Next slide, please. Now, SFELC was formed way back in 2002 when we were still Food Standards Agency in Scotland, and it was set up to support our work by bringing together a wide range of expertise in relation to food and feed law to support the development of strategy and policy. The committee includes representation from local authorities, professional groups, Food Standards Scotland, consumer groups, the food industry, and other parts of government, and it provides a forum for these stakeholders to develop links, discuss current issues, and share best practice. And it also supports project work, including surveys, investigations, and intelligence gathering. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows you how SFELC operates. We've got a main committee, which comprises FSS, all of our stakeholder organisations that I've just mentioned, and members of our 4 regional liaison groups, which cover all 32 local authorities. So that would be environmental health departments and, where appropriate, trading standards officers. This meets at least 4 times a year, but working alongside this, we also have 4 subcommittees, and these focus on animal feed, food standards, food safety, and food crime. Now, the subcommittees provide an opportunity to provide more technical advice over enforcement issues, agree on the interpretation of the legislation, and review guidance and training needs in particular areas. Now, the Food Crimes Subcommittee is the most recent addition, and this is also intended to provide a forum for the food enforcement community to make links with other law enforcement partners, such as Police Scotland, the HMRC and the Immigration Service, to share intelligence on suspected criminal activities that could be linked to food crime. Now, SFELC also gives us a platform for convening subject-specific working groups and targeting a wide range of interests. And at the moment, we have 9 of these groups up and running, as outlined at the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. So through SFELC, we've delivered really a wide range of different outputs, including processes for sharing intelligence, surveillance programmes, and strategic projects. So this includes the rollout of our MenuCal tool, which helps small businesses with allergen and calorie labelling, the CookSafe and Retail Safe packages for food safety management, and also our food hygiene information scheme, which we've rolled out across all Scottish food businesses. We've also developed a huge portfolio of guidance and training to support professional competency, deliver new strategic priorities, and strengthen knowledge and skills across a range of subjects, including support for enforcement activities in emerging or niche sectors. And I'll now run through some specific examples just to give you a flavour of what SFELC has helped us to deliver over the past 6 years. Next slide, please. So in terms of guidance, you may have noticed in the earlier slide that SFELC has a subgroup on risky foods, and this was originally set up back in 2015 to address some of the enforcement challenges we were seeing at that time with the emerging market in rare or less than thoroughly cooked burgers. Now, at that time, we were clear that it was for the food businesses to demonstrate that they had effective measures in place to ensure the safety of burgers cooked at a lower time temperature combination than those recommended by the Advisory Committee on Microbiological Safety of Food. And there were concerns that variable approaches being taken by producers and caterers and challenges with respect to validation could lead to inconsistent enforcement. But having SFELC meant that we were able to convene an expert working group to develop guidance and a decision tree to help officers determine what enforcement approaches were appropriate to take with businesses that were producing rare burgers. And working with local authorities in this way enabled us to roll out guidance very quickly and monitor how it was being applied to ensure consistency. Next slide, please. Now, we faced similar challenges with the unpasteurised cheese sector a few years ago following an outbreak of E. coli 0157, which was linked to a Scottish cheese producer. And this revealed gaps in food safety management and methods for being able to verify the absence of pathogens throughout the process. But again, by convening a working group, we were able to bring together experts from the enforcement community and the sector through the Specialist Cheesemakers Association to reach a common understanding of the issues. And this allowed us to find a way of overcoming the lack of testing methods specifically for sugar toxin producing E. coli to develop a pragmatic sampling approach which enabled businesses to verify the safety of their products. Next slide, please. Another area I mentioned was surveillance, and we're able to coordinate this in Scotland through another SFELC working group which supports Food Standards Scotland with horizon scanning activities to identify food chain risks reported on a UK-wide or international basis, as well as those picked up on the ground by officers. Now, we report the findings of this work across the whole of the local authority community through a regular newsletter, and the working group allows us to consider the issues that might be most likely to have an impact on Scottish consumers and food businesses and what steps might be needed to ensure they are addressed. Next slide, please. And this group also works with us to identify annual sampling priorities based on the outputs of horizon scanning and also local authority intelligence. Now, this work is coordinated by our public analyst laboratories, and we're able to analyse and report all of the data that's generated through our through our database called the Scottish Food Sampling Database, or SFSD, which all 32 local authorities in Scotland are signed up to. SFSD allows us to monitor trends in sampling across Scotland in real time, where there are issues and where there are gaps that need to be filled through future surveillance programmes. Next slide, please. But a key priority for Food Standards Scotland over the past 6 years has been the development of our regulatory strategy. This was originally published back in 2017, and it sets out how we will fulfil our role as a national regulator in Scotland and meet our obligations under the Scottish Regulator's Strategic Code of Practice. But it's essentially a framework for shaping our future delivery landscape for food and feed enforcement in Scotland, to ensure a sustainable and ethical approach which enables and supports compliance through intervention approaches that are appropriately targeted to different businesses, taking account of sector-specific challenges and also other relevant factors. So, for example, geography and also staff turnover. And our strong partnerships with local authorities have been critical in taking this forward. Next slide, please. So this slide just serves to outline the 4 work streams of our regulatory strategy and what we're aiming to achieve. And there are 4 key strands to this work. One on regulatory assurance, which is looking at how our system for delivering official controls can take better account of third-party assurance schemes. We also have work streams looking at the modernisation of our regulatory system through more sustainable models of delivery and funding mechanisms. And finally, an underpinning programme of work which is focused on digitalisation and innovation. And it's worth highlighting that a lot of the work in our regulatory strategy stems from recommendations for improvements to our enforcement regime that were made by Scottish Government's expert review of lessons learned from the horsemeat incident. This is also known as the Scudamore report, and it's similar to the Elliott report that was of a similar review undertaken elsewhere in the UK. And one of the overarching aims is about developing a more data-driven approach to enforcement, targeting interventions through a compliance spectrum approach, which is shown at the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. Now, this is all about recognising and rewarding food businesses which are consistently compliant, identifying businesses that lack knowledge and understanding and need support and guidance that sit in the middle of the spectrum, and then ensuring appropriate sanctions are taken against those businesses at the bottom of the spectrum, and that's those which persistently break the law. Next slide, please. And one of the first deliverables of our regulatory strategy was to develop a new food law rating scheme that we call FLRS. Now, historically, businesses were given separate ratings and inspection schemes for food safety and standards, but the horsemeat scandal raised concerns that food standards was not being given a high enough profile. The Scudamore report recommended that risk ratings and inspection frequencies should be examined to identify more effective ways of picking up these types of non-compliance. And to take this forward, we convened a SVELT working group, which concluded that the best way forward would be to combine food safety and standards into a single system. Now, the rationale was that this system would help to raise the profile of food standards while reducing duplication and bureaucracy caused by 2 different inspection schemes. Importantly, it would also help local authorities to target their resources on high risk and non-compliant businesses. Next slide, please. So this was actually a pretty radical idea that would transform the way food law enforcement was delivered. But this slide shows you the timeline we were working to. And through SVELT, we were able to move from a pilot phase right through to implementation across all 32 local authorities within 3 years. Next slide, please. And I'll just quickly run through how the system works. So in simple terms, businesses are allocated to one of 3 groups based on their risk profile. The system scores each business based on a set of 5 performance levels, which puts them in a banding A to E, which we call the ladder. And they're then given an intervention frequency based on where they sit in this ladder. So each business will always remain within its designated group of business type, but it can move up or down the ladder within this group based on its performance level. Next slide, please. And the performance level of a business is determined by this compliance matrix, which gives a score based on combined performance across the 7 categories shown here on the y-axis. So that includes things like food safety systems and practice performance, their cross-contamination controls, structural performance, food information performance, composition performance, food safety management systems, and confidence in management. And the x-axis of the matrix details the compliance levels. Now, all 7 compliance categories are awarded a corresponding compliance level, and a weighting is applied to the compliance level score for each of the 7 categories, producing an overall score for that business. And this score determines the performance level on the ladder and therefore the corresponding banding and intervention frequency. So a score of 1 would put a business into band A with a longer period between interventions, and a score of 5 would put them in band E, requiring an intensive intervention frequency involving monthly inspections. And where any of the 7 compliance categories within the matrix attracts a score of 5, which is serious, the business is automatically rated as a band E on the ladder. But the system also gives the opportunity for businesses in band E to be re-rated quickly when they're able to demonstrate that they've taken action to control the risks. So re-rating will usually be done at the next monthly inspection, but it can be done sooner if the business is able to achieve compliance before this time. So you can see that there are benefits to businesses from this approach, as well as enforcement authorities. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides a summary of the FLRS ladder, just to highlight the simplicity of the approach and its flexibility, with businesses belonging to one of 3 groups with a range of intervention frequencies determined by levels of compliance with both food safety and standards. And this enables businesses to move up and down the ladder based on their performance. Next slide, please. Now, since implementing FLRS in 2019, it has taken a bit of time, lead-in time, to get all of our businesses rated on the system, as we're dealing with around 61,000 of them in total. But this is on track to be completed by September this year, which is a massive achievement, particularly given the challenges we've faced this last year with the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the second key deliverable for a regulatory strategy, which is the development of our Scottish National Database, or SND. Again, the inception for this was a recommendation from the Scudamore Review to develop an integrated IT system for recording data relating to official controls. This has really been a fantastic development, which we're able to take forward with our local authority partners. SND is a cloud-based repository which allows us to collect data from the information management systems which are in use across all 32 local authorities in Scotland. It provides Food Standards Scotland with a centralised view of all enforcement activities on a real-time basis, and produces dashboard reports which can assist local authorities in planning and monitoring. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows you how the system works. On a weekly basis, all of the data of interest relating to the activities, registration, ratings and inspections of all registered food businesses in Scotland are pushed from the 32 local authority IT systems to SND via a connector. And the data can then be processed within the database and accessed through a secure web portal, which can be accessed on a password protected basis by Food Standards Scotland and local authorities. And next slide, please, sorry. And just to give you an idea of how quickly we were able to design, develop and implement SND, this was a project that involved the local authority users and consulted the food industry at every step of the way. And it was undertaken in an agile manner to ensure it was delivered quickly. We worked together to identify options, pilot the system and roll it out within 2 years, which wasn't bad going for an IT transformation project. Next slide, please. And this is just to let you see some of the dashboard reports that we're now getting from SND. This example shows a breakdown of non-compliant businesses in Scotland based on food business category, and we have heat maps on the right-hand side showing non-compliant businesses in different local authority areas in relation to the new food law rating scheme at the top, but also those businesses that remained in the previous system with both food hygiene and food standards inspected separately. So as you can see, SND has really been a massive development for us, and we're now using it across all of our work. For example, we're currently using it to construct more detailed maps of non-compliant businesses to identify the particular sectors which are struggling so that we can explore the possible reasons for this and develop the guidance and support they need to improve. More recently, we've added dashboards for identifying fishing vessels and support in exporting businesses across Scotland. And these have been invaluable in helping to streamline the export system this year by enabling certifying officers to check that the necessary registration and inspections have been undertaken to enable businesses to export, and that national exporter listings held by DEFRA are accurate and kept up to date. And this has really helped to move up to address some of the issues and the bottlenecks that we've been experiencing this year post EU exit. But at a more local level, more and more of our local authorities are also turning to the database to gather data on their activity and help build their service plans. Next slide, please. So finally, to the third transformational output from our regulatory strategy, which has been the work we've done through SVELT to improve the consistency and effectiveness of systems we apply in Scotland to approve food businesses and undertake official controls. The key aims of this project were to develop a unified approach to approvals and interventions by both Food Standards Scotland officials in meat establishments and local authorities. And the main components were to produce common guidelines and a Scottish national protocol for approving food businesses in Scotland to improve knowledge and skills through joint training regimes and a specialist officer network. And finally, to develop a new system for auditing the delivery of official controls based on our national protocol. Next slide, please. In addition to our national protocol for undertaking approvals of food businesses, a key output from this piece of work was the development of new unified guidelines for undertaking official controls at all approved establishments and manufacturers, regardless of whether these are subject to enforcement by Food Standards Scotland or local authorities. Now, when delivering this new approach, we wanted to ensure that it covered all interventions relating to food safety, food standards and food-related crime, because our primary objective was to maintain a consistently high standard of verification through a common framework that can be adapted to suit different types of business. And the most important aspect of this is the guidance and training based on case studies, common inspection tools, which through SVELT we've been able to update and adapt by sharing experience and specialist knowledge. Next slide, please. Our Scottish National Protocol was published in January last year, and it's now in use across all 32 local authorities and by our own staff in meat plants. And to support this, we've also got the Specialist Officer Network up and running. I mean, this has been a real development because it enables officers to access colleagues who have experience or specialist qualifications in particular areas for advice and shadowing opportunities. And our bespoke training programmes and approvals and official control verification, which we have now run 9 times with mixed attendance involving local authority officers, vets and meat hygiene inspectors. And through all of this, we're already seeing more effective information sharing and consistency, but again, SVELT provides an ideal platform for engaging across the community and with the industry to seek feedback on areas where this can be further improved. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my whistle-stop tour of our approach to regulating the food chain in Scotland and how partnership working has really been key to everything that we've achieved. Ultimately, it's about using the collective expertise, knowledge and creativity from the field and getting the buy-in to deliver change by enabling everyone involved to recognise the benefits. And this is something that we've been able to do through the Scottish Food Enforcement Liaison Committee. SVELT is really a model which has served us extremely well over the years, and it continues to go from strength to strength. And I think in light of the challenges that we're facing due to the impacts of EU exit and the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really going to be critical for us to maintain this approach so that we can build a modern and sustainable regulatory system for Scotland's future. Next slide, please. And that's me. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
We're now moving on to our second speaker, Sue Dakin. Sue's enjoyed actually a very diverse career in food safety and quality, compliance, regulatory and innovation roles, and she's recently taken up the role of Head of Food Safety and Quality at British Sugar. So Sue's presenting today on the opportunities for temperature-controlled storage and distribution. For more information on Sue's biography, please check out her profile on our event platform. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for that kind introduction, and hello to everyone who's joined this session. So yeah, the last 12 months have been quite extraordinary for everyone for very many reasons. And yeah, I'm sure everyone's wondering why the head of food safety and quality at British Sugar is presenting on opportunities in the temperature controlled storage and distribution. Well, my story is that before I took on my current role, I was contracted by the Cold Chain Federation to work with their technical expert group and their primary authority, as well as BRCGS, to write the first food safety guidance specifically for the temperature controlled storage and distribution sector, covering both chilled and frozen food. So today I'm going to discuss some of the opportunities that arose from that work. The devil, as they say, is in the detail. And when I started to look at the accepted practices in detail within the sector, some areas really stood out as food safety anomalies. So I wanted to take this opportunity to share my thoughts and hopefully start some discussions which challenge today's normal practice and might eventually lead to some changes. So the opportunities are not all regulatory, but maybe more about the standards that are common practice and accepted within this sector. And my presentation doesn't have all the answers either, and there are no quick fixes, but I think with a will and a positive mindset to progress along with the application of smart regulation, innovation and technology, it's possible to overcome all of the challenges that I'm going to present. So I am going to talk a little bit about the guidance, but this is not a sales pitch. And then I'm going to move on to three, seems like the power of three today, three food safety opportunities that came up. So the three are, the first one is what I believe is a fundamental flaw in the design of trailers and docking bays, which compromises the maintenance of a continuous cold chain. Then I will move on to ask a big question about why cold stores have to operate as low as -25 in some cases, and why frozen food must be maintained at -18 degrees C. And the third one is the challenges around vehicle security from load theft and clandestine travellers. So that's my agenda for today. Without further ado, let's crack on. So firstly, the Cold Chain Federation Food Safety Guidance. So this guidance provides for the very first time a single source of advice which is specific to the sector. So there is guidance, but it doesn't cover the whole sector. And this particular guidance covers three areas. Firstly, the regulatory requirements on hygiene, HACCP, and temperature control as they apply to the sector. And these have been reviewed by the Food Standards Agency and by the CCF Primary Authority, SLAU. Secondly, the guidance covers the most up-to-date certification requirements and includes within its scope the recently published BRCGS Storage and Distribution version 4 standard, and indeed BRCGS were involved and have indicated that they might adopt the guidance to support the standard. And also it includes identified best practice from sector food safety leaders. The guidance isn't yet available. It will be launched in July as part of the Cold Chain Federation's Food Safety Week. And right at the end of this presentation, I'll provide the details for anybody who is interested in finding out more. Okay, so let's move on to the first topic. So this is continuity of temperature control in the cold chain. The challenge is the exposure of products to warm, humid air during docking, loading and unloading. The current situation is that vehicles delivering short life, microbially sensitive products into depots, firstly, they routinely follow trailer manufacturers' guidelines and they switch off the refrigeration when they arrive. Then the vehicle will pull up about 40 feet from, in old money, from the loading bay, and the driver will open the rear doors to the environment, and then back on to what may or may not be an enclosed temperature controlled loading bay. The time it takes to complete this process, the ambient temperature and the conditions, the weather conditions, can be, as you imagine, extremely varied. And once docked, the trailer can sit on the bay with the dock door closed until the operators on the bay are ready to offload. Again, with the refrigeration in the vehicle switched off. So although there is a desire always to turn around vehicles quickly, the time frame that the vehicle can sit on that bay without the fridge unit on can vary. And most cold stores do have policies and protocols in place to control the risks. But by design, this scenario represents a break in what should be a continuous cold chain. And it's a situation where it's possible for both hygiene and product temperature to be compromised. So there already exists a solution for this, which I came across when writing this guidance. The EU exit represents a time of unprecedented growth in the building of cold storage capacity in the UK, and new facilities are being built and older facilities are being renovated. And some forward-thinking businesses are actually building modified docks. So for the first time, the doors of a docked vehicle can be opened after the vehicle has fully backed onto the loading bay. And one such system is called Easy Dock, which can be integrated into existing buildings. And this is a standard that I certainly would like to see more of, and you know, more businesses asking their cold storage solution providers to think about this kind of investment. And I would also question why, as an industry, we haven't yet called time on unrefrigerated and open arrival docks, which do still exist. So that is my first opportunity. Change your loading bays so that vehicles' doors open only when the vehicle is fully docked. So the second one is around -18 as the accepted storage temperature for frozen food. And given the environmental challenges, I believe there is an opportunity to change this as a recognised standard. We all know that we need to behave more sustainably to protect and preserve our planet. And even the most modern, well-insulated and efficiently operated cold and chill stores use a lot of energy. And the fact is that much of the UK estate is very old and not very efficient. So there's actually relatively little laid down in regulation on frozen food storage. And mostly it's found in the quick frozen food regulations, which is a marketing regulation that applies in the UK, but we don't really use it. There's a little bit in the hygiene regulations, but most of it is found in international standards like the ATP, which is a United Nations agreement on the international carriage of perishable goods. And that actually recognises for most frozen foodstuffs -12. So internationally, it is recognised that food is frozen at -12, although free water is not all crystalline until it gets down to -40. And before the quick frozen food regulations, it was standard practice to transport product at -15 and even allow for temporary deviations of temperature by 3 degrees. In fact, some businesses still allow for acceptance of product on delivery at -15 under concession. So -18, where does it come from? Well, it's a temperature of convenience. It was historically accepted or adopted as accepted practice because -18 corresponds to 0 degrees F as adopted in the USA. So it's fairly arbitrary, really. But to be really clear, the storage and transport of food at -12 or -15 does not impact on food safety. Though storage at that temperature for an extended time will affect quality and potentially shorten the optimum best before keeping life. But many businesses call for a really long shelf life on frozen foods. And that is because the colder the food is stored at, the longer the quality will be preserved. But it's about quality, not food safety. And I would question whether it's actually really necessary to put 2 or 3 years or even longer on as the shelf life on a frozen food. It goes way beyond what is necessary for seasonality. So I think businesses are quite greedy in terms of the shelf life they require. And there are some bad practices too. Some businesses do use the cold chain to cool product to compensate for their own poor control or their own lack of chilling capacity. But vehicles and cold stores are not designed to freeze products. They're only designed to maintain the temperature. But very often, cold stores and vehicles have to run very cold down to about -25 because of to compensate for the heat that their customers introduce through their products. It's really bad practice and it is very inefficient. So the most energy efficient, food safe and quality preserving method for storage and transport is a constant and consistent cold temperature, even if that temperature is warmer than -18. And I think -15 would be a good place to start. Now, that would take changes to regulations. The Food Standards Agency takes a very precautionary approach here, and they recommend -18, although it is not necessary for food safety. Customer policies and standards all recognise -18. So it would take an enormous amount of effort and collaboration to change it. But I do believe, given our environmental challenges, that it is a conversation that we need to start to have. So that is the second opportunity. So for the third one, I'm going to move on to food security in the cold chain. So, and that is around the lack of visibility that drivers have into their load carrying areas and the risks of unauthorised access. So drivers are responsible for their loads, yet in most cases they have no access onto loading bays, so they don't get to see what it's loaded or how well secured it is. And when they're in their cabs, they generally have no visibility into the load carrying areas of their vehicles. And there is the increasing threat of clandestine travellers or stowaways. It's a problem that you see even in chilled and frozen transport, and drivers can and are prosecuted if they're found to be carrying migrants. And on occasions, the consequences have been tragic. So freight distribution is considered as one of the most vulnerable aspects of the food supply chain from a security perspective. And whilst 360-degree cameras and GPS systems are becoming more common on the to monitor the external of the environment of the vehicle, there is still more that could be done to improve vehicle design and transport security. So vehicle seals are very common. Some customers make them mandatory for vehicle and load security, but there are still very many journeys, particularly multi-drop journeys, where no seal is used. Not even the unenvironmentally friendly single-use plastic seals. So my suggestion, there's lots of opportunity here. Some bright person, much cleverer than I am, must surely be able to develop a padlock with something like a random number generator or multi-factor authenticating capability, something that can be used to secure every journey and which can be reused. And I can appreciate that it is almost certainly a technical challenge to put cameras inside a frozen or chilled environment because of the risk from ice and condensation. But it must be possible to develop technology to put into the load carrying area so that the driver can see what's going on and avoid some of the issues. So those are so there you have it. Those are my 3 opportunities. They're not easy or quick fixes. I think they're definitely worth a conversation. And I've just put up now, for those who are interested in the guidance, it launches on the 6th of July at a CCF event. And the links to that are in my presentation, which I'm sure will be available after this event. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Our third speaker is Jeremy Winnett. Jeremy is Head of Professional Services at 4PAC, where he's responsible for ensuring customers receive the best possible solution to efficiently manage label and packaging content accuracy. Jeremy's presenting today on how to simplify and de-risk food labelling with dynamic artwork. So for more information on Jeremy's biography, please check out his profile on the event platform. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Jeremy.
Sam, thank you very much for that introduction, and also thank you to Sue and Jackie for 2 very interesting presentations. I'm sure you'll all agree. I'm Jeremy Winnett. I'm Head of Professional Services for 4PAC. I've worked in the CPG industry for 40 years now. In the last 20 to 25 years, really focusing on technology to manage compliance and brand protection. So we're going to talk about artwork today, which is possibly a strange subject to talk about when we're looking really on food safety throughout this conference. But hopefully, over the next 20 minutes, I'll be able to show you why artwork is so important for us all. So as I say, I've worked in technology for some time now, so I just wanted to go through what changes we've seen in technology and why those are changing. I think we're all aware that historically margins are very tight when it comes to the spend on technology. And within any industry, there's always a hierarchy, a hierarchy of spend, if you like, with priorities going to the more customer-facing opportunities, or those that are expected to bring more money in, or certainly improve the bottom line. And sadly, a sad fact is that the quality and technical teams really have had to fight for every penny, and the available spend was limited, and that reflected in the quality of technology that was being used. Equally, a lot of the companies have either this idea that they have one system that will cover every different team, so it'll be covering logistics, and it'll be covering HR, and it'll be covering technical, and it'll be covering commercial, and anyone that's worked with those systems will know that actually they don't do one size fits all, and there's always nuances that are missed. The alternative is they have very, very many small systems that are bespoke to each team, and sadly what happens with a lot of these is they don't speak to each other, so you get problems going forward with this Chinese whisper style of data sharing, where information is passed that hasn't been validated, and you might be by email, or it might be sharing documents, and sadly that does introduce critical errors, and they end up on pack sometimes. But things are changing, and they're changing positively for the technology and quality teams, which is excellent. There's a lot of reasons for that. So there's a succession of high profile incidents. Jackie mentioned earlier the horse meat scandal that was just splashed across everywhere. We've had a lot of these incidents, and the media are certainly beginning to pick up on it. Legislation is changing, not just because of Brexit, God bless it, but also, you know, just day-to-day changes. Legislation continually changes, and that's having an impact on the required information that companies are having to support. But perhaps two of the biggest areas that have an impact is social media and the changing face of the consumers. The massive and rapid growth of the likes of Twitter and Facebook and all the Instagrams and all the other ones is really making companies sit up, because as we know, consumers and Joe Public are very quick to jump onto social media if something's gone wrong. Less so if something's gone right. So companies are having to provide very accurate information very quickly so that they can actually react to these changes. Changing face to consumer is an interesting one. I'm going to talk about some of these in more detail going forward. But consumers are demanding more and more product information for a whole variety of reasons that I will cover. But again, any information that's put forward into the custody domain has to be absolutely guaranteed. It has to be watertight, because again, media are very quick to pick up on anything that's wrong, effectively. This is a typical profile of what we see in a lot of industries, and I'm sure, you know, some of you will be sitting here nodding, thinking about your own business, where you have many, many different teams, all working to the same aim, all talking differently at different times to different teams, and probably all using different systems. The issue that you have with this is that information can get diluted and missed. I worked with one company, one retailer some time ago, and we did a research into how many systems just held the product name, and there was over 60 systems holding the product name. Most of them didn't talk to each other, and often the product name was different from one system to the other. Now, if that happens with just the product information, product name rather, you can imagine as that information proliferates how bad those errors can get. So why artwork? Well, you know, why do I want to talk to you about artwork? Well, artwork is fundamentally critical for the label design. You can't have a label without artwork. So for all these reasons, and this is kind of an agenda of what we're going to go through in the next 15, 20 minutes, this is driving changes on the label. So we've got the recalls, we talked about those, and we're going to talk in more detail, due to incorrect labelling information under intense scrutiny. Allergen information is increasingly in the spotlight, and correct ingredients listings often an issue. Body conscious, we've heard about the pandemic many times this morning, and I think one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is we're all perhaps a little bit cuddlier than we were when we started. But seriously, people are looking now at changing their lifestyle, and actually starting to take care of themselves. And because of that, they're looking for more and more information on pack. This strange team of people called Generation Z, I'm going to talk about those shortly. They expect more detailed product information. Competition is driving products to change quickly and more products to be launched, while at the same time resources are being cut. And sorry to mention it, Brexit has come up. So all of these are putting intense pressure on companies to keep labels and keep products being churned out. So as I say, artwork is absolutely integral to getting the label right. So if you have a faulty artwork process, then your label is going to be compromised and potentially going to be putting information out that is incorrect. This is just a mock-up of a packaging, but what I'm trying to show you here is all the different teams that come together to put the information on the packaging, and sometimes people can lose track of this. But just for example, here we've got designing, we've got marketing, we've got the food technology, QA, obviously, what supply chain, the legal people will be involved, packaging teams will be involved. So you have all these disparate teams all working together to the same end, but all providing information. So what that actually means is you have multiple opportunities for errors coming in, and that needs to be tightly controlled. My argument is that that control can actually happen at the artwork stage if you have the right systems in place. So label-driven recalls, it is the ever-present issue with our industry, sadly. I wrote an article in 2015 following a incident where gluten had been incorrectly, I think, missed off a label. And there's a lot of navel-gazing by the industry at the time. Why can't we get on top of this? There's technology to support the information. And what a lot of people are looking at is there's information, certainly there's systems rather, that can manage the information at collection point. But what people aren't looking at so strongly is that the information needs to be managed at the point where it's going onto the label. So just in preparation for this presentation, I was just looking through, and I'm sure you're aware, the Food Standards Agency, you can actually go on and see the current alerts. And on the first page of their site, 60% of the recalls on that page were due to mislabeling. Now, every recall costs money. Obviously, there's the cost of the lost product, but there's also the cost of the brand reputation to the consumer, and equally the brand reputation to, if you're a supplier providing to a retailer, their perception of you. So there's a lot of issues with having a recall, and we want to avoid that. So why are we having these problems? Well, a lot of companies rely on manual processes for passing information to the labelling people. So, for instance, something like the pack copy information may be copy and pasted many times before it actually gets to the artwork company that are putting it on the page. And we all know that every time you do a copy and paste, there is the potential you could perhaps miss the bottom line off, or even miss the top line off. So there is this creeping potential for error. There's also who decides what information is critical on the label. Now, obviously, any QA managers amongst you are going to be saying, well, I'm responsible for the technical information. But by the time it gets onto the label, labelling teams will tweak information just to move it around. There's a big challenge at the moment between having all the information on the packaging at the same time trying to make the packaging look nice. If you've not got the controls in place, then there's a potential that information could get changed that is different to the specification. So it's really critical that we start managing the information that's going onto the label as one method of limiting these label-driven recalls. What we're saying here is we need to improve the validation and approval of label data, but then we need to have this secure managed transfer of data through to the artwork phases. Again, I'll come back to this point. Artwork is fundamental to having safe labels. So if we manage that safe transfer, we can reduce the number of label-driven recalls. The growing demand for information. There are so many reasons why customers want this information to grow. As I'm sure you're all aware, this week is Allergen Awareness Week, and there's been a lot of great articles and presentations and all sorts of information out there. But the bottom line is that we are aware that allergies are growing rapidly, not just in the UK, but globally. Again, when I was doing some research for today, I saw figures that 2 million adults in the UK now suffer from allergies, and 7% of children, and those figures are growing. There's people that obviously specialise in those that are far more intelligent than I am that will go into the reasons for that, you know, the sterile world that we live in and all that sort of thing. But the bottom line is that allergies are growing, and sadly, when labelling goes wrong, that can have a devastating impact. And obviously, we know about Natasha and Natasha's law. That was splashed all over the paper. But again, because of the potential risk, the more salubrious of the media, shall we say, the red tops are really keen to portray it as you know, the salacious headlines and everything. The broadsheets, more detailed investigations, but it does come up time and time again. The government do take an interest in our health. Obviously, it's, you know, our unhealthy lifestyles have a massive impact on the NHS and ourselves. So there are a number of initiatives that we've had. We've had the SALT initiative, we've had fat reduction. Current one is the sugar intakes. Every time we have these initiatives, it means that the manufacturers have to reformulate their products. Now, every time you have a reformulation, that obviously can have a knock-on effect for the packaging and the labelling. And if you have, when we had the low-fat initiative, then companies were jumping on the bandwagon, saying their products low-fat. You need to be able to back that up with the nutrition information, for instance, that's on there. And same with the sugar, you know, to prove the levels of sugar. We have the traffic lighting system. I remember very well a retailer that when we first introduced the traffic light, their healthy range was all in the red zone. So their board just said, we'll just change the parameters so that it moves down to the green zone. So we do need to actually challenge these. And then we have Generation Z. We know about the baby boomers, Generation X, and they keep coming up with these names for different generations. And this generation was born in 1995 through till 2012. So they've actually grown up in a world where they've never not had the internet, which for some of my age is scary to think about. What that actually means is they have always had information readily available at their fingertips, be it on the computer, on their phones, on their iPads, whatever it may be. And they have an expectation that information is very quickly and readily available, and anything they ask for is there. Equally, as we've seen with the likes of Greta and what have you, that they're very environmentally aware, and they put in a lot of importance on things such as healthy food, obviously, but sustainability, ethical issues, the environment, carbon footprint. And these are having a major impact on their buying decisions. And equally, because of their age and they're having a major impact on the family buying decisions. So they have an expectation that product information is going to be there and going to be available, and perhaps in much more detail than we've ever provided in the past. So we have this dilemma where consumers are asking for more information, but at the same time they're complaining that labels are confusing. And certainly looking at a few labels this week, just looking for something as simple as storage instructions is devilishly difficult because there's so much information on there. So managing the artwork for a label is really becoming critical to being able to provide customers with that clear, concise information. Finally, we have the changes to legislation and labelling as a result of Brexit. By, I think it's September 2022, companies have to comply with legislation to ensure that their labelling is correct at point of source. So for all of these reasons, we're seeing a major focus on products changing and necessarily label information being improved and augmented. So technical specification data is easily validated and approved. There's many systems out there that do that. But where the breakdown is if the system isn't talking, isn't integrated with the artwork solution. So to actually manage that critical product information, you need to integrate the two solutions so that only approved information can appear on pack. Just looking at a couple of other issues that are affecting why we're having to change products, and by changing products, change labels. You have the COVID pandemic. We've heard about this already this morning a number of times, but certainly this is having a major impact on the industry, and really historic rule books are being ripped up, thrown in the bin, and we're approaching a whole new world. And in that, supply chain challenges are really impacting critical product information. So companies are having to use technology to keep up with the rapidly changing supply chain information, and necessarily so that obviously having to look at labels to make sure that the information is still correct at source. Cost-cutting initiatives, as not just as a result of the pandemic, but there's always sort of nibbling away at how they can save the money and cut money back. And sadly, the fact of the matter is when cost-cutting exercises go ahead, they tend to be at the back end rather than on the front end. And often it's the technical teams that are scaled down, despite the inherent risks. Now, quite often businesses will understand that there's a risk in scaling quality and technical down, but they'll take that risk, they'll accept that risk. So is there a way that actually we can look at cost cutting and at the same time protect the quality and technical information that's being put out there? Arguably, yes, we can. Consumers are demanding more information. We've already seen that, but they want marketing wants to make the label attractive. So are those two requirements compatible? Can we have attractive labeling where we've got a packet full of information? It is a dilemma. And obviously increasing rapid product innovation. We're very fortunate in both the UK and Europe, as we are seen globally as a benchmark for innovation in the retail industry. And I can say that with confidence, having travelled the world working with retailers around the world. That rapid product innovation and retail innovation is largely driven by our geography. We are, relatively speaking, a group of small countries, excuse me, and within each of those countries there's a competitive market, and those competitive markets are driving innovation. So companies are having to react very quickly. Now, with those innovations means they want to get product to market very quickly as well. So, you know, there's the potential to cut corners to try and get information out there. So let's start looking at artwork. That's what I'm here for. This list of common challenges, I'll put it down as artwork management, but it could be for many different areas. And I'm sure some of you are looking at this and sort of nodding your head sagely, thinking, yep, that resonates with me. So you have cross-functional teams managing cross-functional product information, manual version control and documents, so no one's quite sure which is the latest document. Errors due to copy and pasting, I've talked about that already. And at the bottom there, projects managed through email, PDF, spreadsheet, Teams, Zoom, as we have here. All these different ways of managing information just means that there's always a potential for a breakpoint. So root cause analysis will look at these sort of areas and say, this is potentially where things can go wrong. So what I want to share is this idea of dynamic artwork. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about that, but it is a growing opportunity throughout the industry. And it really kicked off with the pharmaceutical business. Pharmaceutical industry cannot put out incorrect labeling. So pack copy and artwork is business critical. And they've invested heavily to use technology to manage the artwork process to ensure that the label that goes out there is accurate. They've got very robust change control and validation, and 100% accuracy is demanding. Can you imagine picking some medicine off the shelf rather, and not knowing if the information is accurate on there? So what they've been using is this thing called dynamic labeling, and they've been using it for some time now, and it's now beginning to creep out into the wider world. So what is dynamic artwork? Well, it's the marriage of the artwork piece and the product information. So if I may be so bold as to use ourselves as an example, we provide graphic agencies with a template designers. We use Adobe InDesign. Other template opportunities are available. And the agencies will then create the labels, such as you see there. So it will have placeholders for the information. It will have the colors right. It will have the branding right. It may have some images on there. So that is a template that can then be reused. And this is one of the keys for dynamic artwork, the ability to reuse templates, because that cuts down time significantly. While that's going on, while that's being designed, we'll have the standard process for capturing specification information. And the typical product specification will have everything from marketing information, commercial information, and importantly, it'll have the technical information for the packaging. Is typically called pack copy or label copy information. And this will be the area that the quality and technical teams will be most interested in. So the specification will go through its natural process of being completed. The information will be validated, and it will be reviewed by all the appropriate teams responsible for the data, including the quality and technical, and then it will be locked. So that specification is then locked. And the clever part with dynamic artwork is it then overlays one with the other. So as I say, when the template is created, there are placeholders for the information, and the system will recognize the information from within the pack copy and embed that into the packaging design. So where the nutrition panel is meant to be, the system will lift the nutritional panel out of the specification. Same for the ingredient declaration or the allergen information. It will all be lifted directly from it. And it's presented as two layers to the user. So they can actually manipulate these placeholders, but the system will warn them if they start moving information out of the placeholder. They can update the information, but the crucial point here, and why this actually introduces another level of control, is as soon as that information has changed, then a flag will appear not just on the artwork, but also in the specification, and customer by customer, it's customer dependent. That can then flag another approval process, so that the artwork cannot go to completion without that being fully controlled and fully managed in-house. So that has significantly reduced the time. This is all done electronically. Everybody's using the same system, so everybody can see what's happening. Now, the traditional method, and we'll look at some timescales in a second, traditional methods can take days or even weeks to get a piece of artwork completed, and there'll be a lot of to and fro by email and phone call and what have you. This actually allows you to do the whole artwork process once the template and the specification has been completed in minutes. So you've made a significant saving in time there. But the critical piece is you've not only saved the time, is you've actually introduced another layer of refinement on the product data and validation of the product information. So you can be absolutely sure that what you have approved in the specification is reflected on the artwork, and you don't get that disconnect, which is such an issue for the industry.
Jeremy, sorry to interrupt.
So if we go back to
Jeremy, sorry to interrupt, but we're just in the, we've got 5 minutes and then the webinar has to end. So we're in the Q&A time now.
I'm literally, I've got two slides left.
Excellent.
Yeah, okay. So this is just a slide that shows where all of that packaging information can be found. And if we look at the timing, you can see from a traditional timing how it drops with dynamic timing. And then that also drops once you have reusing the template. So we were with a company called Vincenzi in Italy, and they had a 75+% improvement in timing, but at the same time, they managed the quality of their label. So it will become the de facto standard. The food and beverage sector have been slower, but because of all the reasons we've been talking about and the focus on label changes, that information is going to start being, the use of technology rather, is going to be essential, and we are absolutely convinced that dynamic artwork will be de facto, and that will save money, but at the same time, it will also improve the quality of data on the label. So we feel it's going to have a very positive effect for the industry. We're 4PAC, and I've been Jeremy Winnett. Thank you very much for your time, and apologies if I have run over slightly.